Are you suffering from the sunk cost fallacy? Well, you already clicked this video, so you might as well stick around and find out. How you doing tonight? Excellent. I'm False Prophet of Twisted Jenius, and on this channel we love villainous psychology and dark fun. Now, our brains have this tendency to try to shortcut stuff for us. They really like it to try to make it so we don't have to think as much, basically, because thinking takes work, it takes nutrients, it takes blood sugar, it takes a lot of things. And so our brains like to help us to not have to do as much of that, to kind of go on autopilot. And one of the ways that this does this is it can be sometimes helpful and sometimes detrimental is with the sunk cost fallacy. Now, what the sunk cost fallacy really is our tendency to want to put more resources, money, energy, effort, time into something just because we've already put a certain amount of effort, energy, time, resources into it. It's the idea that we are going to somehow lose what we've put in if we don't put more into it. Or it's sticking with something, sometimes regardless of whether it's even a good idea or not to continue, because we've already expended something on it. And in many cases, this is very dumb. Sometimes it works to our advantage, and it can have practical benefit, and that's why our brains do it sometimes. But in a lot of cases, when we talk about this topic, and what we're going to be discussing here tonight is when it completely backfires and is just simply not a very good idea. So there are many examples of instances we find in daily life where this kind of tendency we have just really isn't a very good idea. Some examples are finishing a book or movie or TV series. Have you ever decided to keep binge watching a series, for example, even though you decided the plot's not going anywhere or you don't really like it or it's, got stale after the second season or whatever, but you feel invested in it, so it's like, well, okay, I already started watching this thing, I've been watching it for a while, let me just continue because I already put as much time into it. That's an example of the sunk cost fallacy. Another really common example is buying some food, deciding you don't like it, but then feeling like you have to eat it anyway. Has that ever happened to you? Ever bought something, you have it there on your plate, wait, this doesn't actually taste as good as I had hoped. I really don't like this, but I have to eat it anyway because I already bought it. I put money into it, so obviously I have to eat it. Or even people who are dieting sometimes use similar rationales for this. Yeah, well, I have to eat it because I paid money for it. Sometimes that's an excuse, but it's not necessary. You're not going to get that money back either way, but you can eat crappy or food that's frankly bad for you just because you bought it. And if you really think about the logic there, that doesn't necessarily make any sense, especially if you have money for other food or if you don't want to eat all of the food. In any case, it's a logical fallacy. You also see this tendency with gamblers. People who say, well, okay, I already put in a certain amount of money, I lost some money, so now I've got to make it back. I have to keep going because I've already started betting. I've already lost this much money, so obviously I have to keep betting so I get it back. Of course, that usually doesn't work out that way, and in fact, most casinos are designed so that you don't walk away with more money than you came in with. That's kind of the point. That's the business model. They're very good at that. But that's a logical fallacy right there. And then this also applies to more serious things. People stay in relationships sometimes because they put time and effort and emotion into it, even if it's not going the way they want it to, even if they know that it isn't right for them. Sometimes they stay just because of what they've already put in. And the same goes for career, for jobs, for a business, even for certain projects within a company or business. We've already spent this much money on this thing, we've allocated this much time and resources, so we have to keep doing it because we've allocated this much time and resources, even though it's not turning out the way we wanted to. It's not making me happy in the case of personal career. But people keep doing this because they believe that they'll lose something. If they don't, they'll lose what they put into it. But of course, this is unrealistic or just incorrect because they'll lose it anyway. It's gone. Once you put it in, it's gone. Once you spend the money, once you expend the time, once you expend the energy, it's no longer there either way. And this is the trap with this type of thinking, but a lot of people do this. In fact, I'd say we all do this to a certain extent, and we do it a lot. So what's the best way to avoid this little psychological pitfall? Well, the first step is to learn to recognize when something isn't working. And a good rule, not just for this, but for life in general, by the way, is when we realize we're doing something stupid, stop doing it. When we realize we're doing something stupid, stop doing it. And that sounds like common sense, right? Well, of course, just stop doing something if it's stupid, right? Obviously. But it's amazing how often people don't follow that very simple idea, that common advice there. And our minds can come up with all kinds of crazy reasons to keep doing something, even if it really isn't very intelligent or if it isn't getting us the results we want. And the sunk cost fallacy is just one of the ways that our minds get us to do this. So one psychological tactic for dealing with this problem is to have the standard, to hold yourself to the standard that intelligence is an important attribute, that's an important value that you hold to yourself. Being, an evil mastermind, that's kind of important to me, but it works even if you're not a villain. It works because if you hold yourself to that standard, or at least if you believe that intelligence, being smart, doing the intelligent thing, is an important attribute to have, then you make it unacceptable to continue doing something once you realize that it's really dumb to do or that it's not the most intelligent course of action. And by embodying that, by holding yourself to that standard, you naturally just refuse to do that. And I'm sure there's something that you right now, regardless of who you are, simply won't do. Maybe it's a certain type of illegal activity, maybe it's a certain type of positive activity, recreation. Some people would never go whitewater rafting or would never jump out of a plane. Some people would never get a tattoo. Some people would never take certain types of illegal substances. Some people would never commit murder. There's all kinds of good things or bad things that you or some other person would just simply not ever want to do. You just say, no, I'm not the type of person to do that. And there's little things too. There's just little ideas. There's little conversations. Maybe you're the type of person who would never use a certain type of word or slur. Maybe you're the type of person who says, I would never say something like that or do this even small thing because that's just not who I am. If you make doing something that you know is dumb one of those things, then it's really easy to avoid doing something dumb or getting caught in that trap once you know that this isn't a good idea and you won't allow yourself to fall into that. And of course, the other problem with the sunk cost fallacy is that there's also a certain level of ego here. Because to admit that something you've been doing isn't working, that you've put time or money or effort into, it also means that you have to admit that you made a wrong call. It doesn't even necessarily mean that you made a wrong call. What it actually means is that you just didn't have the information then that you have now. Or maybe it was the right call at that time, but the situation has changed now. But the important thing to remember about this is that it doesn't matter what you did before, what money, time, effort you put in, because that's already gone. What really matters is what you do in the future. But I think the biggest problem for people is just that it also requires a certain amount of effort, a certain amount of willpower to redirect ourselves to the right course of action. You have to not only recognize that this is not working the way you wanted it to, but you also have to change the way you're doing things. And once you have a certain amount of momentum, once you feel you've committed to something, that can also be very challenging. And so you have to truly desire to change what you're doing there. But the real problem with the sunk cost fallacy is that it's essentially a defensive mindset. And what I mean by that is that it makes you totally concerned, or it is totally concerned, with protecting yourself, protecting what you've lost, as opposed to gaining something new. It's not an offensive mindset, it's a defensive mindset. It's a scarcity mindset, as some people call it. And not only is this completely irrational because you've already lost whatever you're worried about, throwing away. You've already thrown away that money, that time, that energy, and you're never going to get it back regardless of what you do. But in addition to that, it also comes with an inherent opportunity cost. And what opportunity cost simply means is it's the price you pay for choosing one opportunity over another. Anytime you devote or continue to devote money, resources, time, energy, anything like that to one thing, then you almost inevitably miss out on something else because you only have a certain amount of time, energy, money at any given time or day. And so if you continue on a path of something that really isn't working for you very well or isn't giving you the results you want, and you know that, and you're only clinging to that because you already put time, money, and effort into this thing that really isn't what you want, then you're actually, in many cases, missing out on something else. Now, that's not always the case. It's not always that simple. In fact, these situations can actually be very complicated. When you're talking about something like career relationships, there's a whole lot of variables. Even the food example can be said that, okay, you can still eat and still get the nutrients from it. So it's not that cut and dry, but it's good to be aware that this is an issue and this is a trap that people fall into, and it's not a good reason for doing anything, really, if you really think about it. It doesn't make a tremendous amount of sense in a large logical way. But the real issue here is that the sunk cost fallacy has a way of obscuring our priorities. It makes us forget about what we actually want and focus on what we think we've lost or what we think we've invested that we have to make up in this thing that we were doing that isn't working or isn't giving us what we want. And that's what we really have to look out for, and that's the insidious part of this. To forget your goals and focus on just getting back or making up for or thinking that you have to stick with something simply because you've already put something into it doesn't make a lot of sense. And this can be something that's very difficult for humans to really wrap their heads around. It's a simple idea, and this applies to many aspects of life, not just this particular topic, and it's really good to understand if you can. But it's the idea that the future is all there is. The choices we make now and going forward are all we have. There is a past, and we remember it, and we can learn lessons from the past, but it's gone. We can't affect the past anymore. It's already happened. Any money we've spent, anything we've done, anything that's happened, any decisions we've made in the past, whether they were good or bad, are gone now. And the future is all that we have any real control over at all. The future decisions we make. Now, we don't have control over everything in the future, obviously. I mean, that would be cool if we did. But we can control the decisions we make. And we can change our course. You can make a decision, the same decision, every day of your life for years, and then just suddenly decide to make a different one. Change everything up. And most people don't do that. Most people don't live that way. In fact, some people would find that very inconsistent and disconcerting. And culturally speaking, we actually don't like it when people do that. That's considered unreliable or even scary sometimes. Although, I will also point out that one of the classic definitions of insanity is doing something over and over again, expecting different results. And if you want different results, then it is important to change what you're doing consistently. And sometimes, to achieve our goals, we have to be inconsistent, or we have to change direction. We have to do something differently than we've done it before. And sometimes that means leaving what we had done behind. Sometimes that means forsaking certain views. Sometimes we have to change our political views. We have to change our careers. We have to change our relationships. We have to change our hobbies. We have to change our lifestyles. If we want different results, we have to change sometimes. And not only can that be frightening, but it also means, at least in our minds, giving up what we've already put into it. And that is the sunk cost fallacy right there. but it's irrational because you're never getting that stuff back anyway. That time is gone. All you can do is look forward. All you can do is keep moving into a new direction. And that's all we can do as humans. There's a quote that I really like that goes, "The most dangerous phrase in the language is, 'We've always done it that way.'" That's actually, specifically, it's a computer industry quote, but it can apply to self-development, personal growth, career, business, evolution in general there. Just because you've done something some way for a long time and you've started on a path does not mean you have to continue that path at all. You can change that. And that does mean abandoning sometimes a lot of the work, a lot of the effort, a lot of the time and money you may have put into whatever it was before. But that's the only way we grow. Think about that. How do you change if you don't change what you're doing? It's really simple. And that might mean changing the way you think, changing the way you view the world, changing all kinds of things. But that's okay, because that is necessary to grow and to improve. And as a motivational villain, I am very up on that idea. So what do you do if you find yourself stuck in this kind of mindset of the sunk cost fallacy? Well, the easiest thing to do is to decide. Make the decision that you can cut your losses. And don't be afraid to be ruthless about it. Ruthless with yourself, ruthless with the world. It doesn't matter. Because it is dumb and unacceptable to continue doing something that you know isn't working, that isn't giving you the results you want, simply because you've already put a certain amount of resources into it. And there are going to be people who will claim that this approach is harsh, or that it may make you seem erratic, or that it's just plain scary. And to a certain extent they're right, but that's okay because it's still necessary. Because doing something that isn't going to give you what you want is just a bad idea, and continuing to do it because you've put stuff into it. And I also want to point out that the sunk cost fallacy often doesn't just operate on its own individually. A lot of times our minds can come up with a lot of other reasons, justifications for continuing to do something, and usually that's one of them. But whenever you see that as part of your justification, that can be a really nice red flag. Hey, wait a second, what's going on here? Wait, am I thinking like that? Is that really a good reason to keep doing this? Usually not. And so you want to be very careful and very aware of that. And of course, it's also very important to keep in mind what you have to gain instead of focusing on what you've lost. Because, well, as I've pointed out before, you lost it anyway. It's gone. That's why it's a falsity, because you already spent that time, energy, money, effort in it. And now all you have to do is focus on what you want to gain. And if you can't focus on what you have to gain, if you're still scared of loss, then channel that. Be afraid of the loss of what you could be getting if you weren't stuck doing this thing that isn't giving you what you want anyway. We only have a certain amount of time on this earth. We only have a certain amount of resources that we can work with here. And so it's very important that we spend it in a way that gives us the results we want and that's intelligent for us. And only you can really decide what that is. It's all decision making is value clarification. You have to know what you value and what's important to you. But by definition, the sunk cost fallacy is causing you to focus on something that is not as valuable to you. It's focusing on something that you can't even control because it's gone. That's the whole point. And so that's why you don't want to get stuck thinking about this, but our minds do that anyway. They want to commit to something because we've put so much into something, even though what we've put in is already gone. And so it's important to remember that. It can be a little bit painful. We can think, okay, it sucks that this is gone. It sucks that I expended this much time, energy, money, whatever into this. But that's the reality. And accepting that reality and focusing on what you can do now in this moment in time, the decisions you make now, is really the best cure. And just being aware that this is a phenomenon, that this is something that happens, can really help you to catch it and say, okay, no, this isn't good anymore. I have to make a change now. I have to change my direction, change my course, try something else because this isn't working very well for me anymore. But making a dumb decision in the past does not justify continuing to do the stupid thing in the future. You have to get past that and decide that you're going to cut your losses. I hope you've enjoyed this little exploration into the savage landscape of your mind. And since you've already made it this far, you might as well go ahead and give the video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any more villainous inspiration and dark fun. I'm False Prophet with Twisted Jenius saying, stay evil and good night. Is sunk cost fallacy really a good idea for a video? Screw it. I mean, I've already spent several hours on it. I might as well just, finish it up and post it, right?